back here at Online on Classic Country, AM 1450 here on this Friday morning. It's time now to take a look at a week in review from a news standpoint with Chris Graham of the Augusta Free Press. Chris, lots to talk about. Obviously, Governor Bob McDonnell this week, I guess here recently he was asked about any presidential aspirations in 2012. On a national basis, I've not heard his name really mentioned by some of the national shows about all the various Republican possible contenders for the presidency in 2012. But again, Bob McDonnell, I guess he was asked that question earlier this week.
Yeah, well, not mentioned as a top contender, certainly, because, to run for president and be a top contender for a nomination in an open field like the GOP field will be for 2012, you got to put a lot of time, money, and effort into that. You got to go to Iowa a lot, all those kind of things. And I don't know that anybody would expect a sitting governor in a state like Virginia to be able to do that much work. But I think the question comes, and it was posed in an interview by a Washington Post reporter this week. I think the question comes because even though there isn't a lot of feeling that maybe Bob McDonnell will be a contender in the field for president in 2012, that he would be probably a good contender for the vice presidential slot in 2012 on the GOP side. He's a governor of a state that in 2008 voted for Barack Obama for their electoral votes. Of course, has 2 U.S. senators who are Democrats. And so a Republican sitting governor who got elected by a landslide margin in a state like that could be very valuable on the national ticket. And of course, Bob McDonnell has a lot of praise, a lot of praise and cachet in the Republican Party. So the feeling that he could fit that number 2 spot pretty well, I think, is what's generating this talk. And
now, of course, Sarah Palin did that. But my question is, if somehow, some way down the road, McDonnell was tagged by whoever gets the nomination as the VP slot, does that necessarily mean he has to give up the governor's chair here in Virginia?
No, he does not until he would get elected. If that ticket were to then win, of course. But you don't have to give it up just to run. Sarah Palin, of course, a great example of that. She kept her job as Alaska governor until through that election cycle. So I think what's happening though in Virginia is that of course a few years ago, more than a few years ago now, a couple of decades ago, Doug Wilder, a former Virginia governor, made a brief run for the for presidential nomination on the Democratic side in 1992, and of course Republicans in Virginia really were up in arms about a sitting governor in Virginia, making that kind of effort. Mark Warner's name was linked to possibly president and vice president in 2004. Tim Kaine's name came up in 2008, and Republicans were also quite vocal about how the Democratic governors were going to be abandoning the state of Virginia and giving up their elected job to go run for some political office. And so those kind of things come back to bite you. And I think that in fact the way this story comes up this week in a context for Augusta Free Press was we get some word from Democratic Party Virginia Chair Dick Cranwell kind of bringing that issue up. So I think that's the dichotomy we have here in Virginia. For whatever reason, people in other states, senators and governors who have been elected to office and are still working on those jobs, can seem to run freely for those other bigger jobs and no problem, no questions asked. But in Virginia, both parties sort of, cap the knees of the people who try to do that from sitting positions. So I think we'll see some back and forth on this issue from Democrats and Republicans, but I still do think that Bob McDonnell could be a very attractive candidate for Republicans in 2012 as a number 2 on that ticket. So I think this issue won't go away.
And Chris, also making the news this week, Republican delegate Ben Cline and his feeling that some workers for employees for the Virginia Lottery are misusing the Redskins legacy luxury suites.
Yeah, the issue first came up on a political blog from a guy who calls himself not Larry Sabato, Ben Tribbett, a Democratic operative actually in Northern Virginia. He's also a big Redskins fan, and back at the first game of the season, home game of the season for the Skins, he noticed that the Redskins Legacy Lottery game, which offers you and 19 of your friends access to a Redskins box for a game, was not being used by a ticket winner, but by lottery staff. And so Ben Tribbett raises this issue on his website. Ben Cline, on the other side of the aisle, the Republican delegate from here in the Valley, decides to look into it. So he has a conversation back and forth with lottery officials and finds, at least as he phrases it, he finds that lottery officials did in fact use that suite that day. without having a ticket winner. But I get an email after writing a brief story on the Augusta Free Press from a lottery spokesperson who points out that, hey, there's a little bit more to this. It wasn't quite that we just used it for lottery staff members and had a great time in the box. They actually used the box, according to the lottery officials, as a staging area for a halftime, on the field presentation to the FedEx Field crowd there to basically promote the game and promote what the Virginia Lottery has done for Virginia education over the years. So a little bit of back and forth there between Ben Cline and lottery officials as to the exact nature of the use of that box, but there still is a question. And Ben Cline says, hey, it shouldn't have been used for this purpose. It was reserved for the ticket winners, and it does feel like a little bit of a boondoggle. He promises to bring up legislation in the General Assembly session next year to bring up an independent audit of the lottery to make sure that they're spending the money the way they say they are. So I think.
Don't you think these kinds of abuses, if you want to call it that, really run the gamut in state government? I mean, if indeed this occurred, as Ben says, or as he was told, and it's 100% blatant, don't you think this is, I don't know, would you feel it's widespread?
Well, one, I don't think it's 100% blatant. I think Ben is raising a good point that the lottery, Virginia Lottery, reserved the box to use for the ticket winners, and they didn't. I mean, they say they did not use this one for this one game for the ticket winners. They used it as a staging area. I think there is some question, hey, do you need a luxury box as a staging area? Could you stage somewhere else? Could you do this some other way? They had I guess their feeling was they had the box, let's use it for what we need to do. Let's get our people out there in the field at halftime, promote the lottery, and then move on. And oh, by the way, yeah, they did get to enjoy the game from a luxury box. I would bet that there'd be some, it happened that a political blogger, found this out and that Ben Cline asked questions about it afterwards. So good for them for raising the issue and following up on it. And I'd be surprised if, whether it's local government, state government, federal government, that there aren't some, examples of abuses of this kind of thing that are out there. Whether they're blatant or not is a question, but certainly, there's so much going on in government activity that when you're talking about specifically marketing type things too, your average local economic development director goes out on golf junkets to woo business leaders into maybe bringing industry to a local community. Is that is the golf that they get to enjoy while doing so the abuse and then the business they bring a good thing? I mean, there's a lot of gray area here, I think, and but good for Ben Cline for raising the issue, and I think it's something that'll be looked at more thoroughly next General Assembly session.
Okay, Chris Graham with the Augusta Free Press. I know lots going on this weekend, Chris. We've got Christmas parades up and down the valley probably this weekend, and of course lots of sports action. What are we looking from a news standpoint in the coming days from the Augusta Free Press?
Well, we're hopefully going to be getting our readers ready for the 2011 Virginia General Assembly session. We've had some feelers out there to Ben Cline and to Emmett Hanger and others to help us get a feel from a local perspective on what the big issues will be, both from a local perspective, but also get their local views on the state issues of the day. So that's going to be a focus for us for the next few weeks. Hopefully, there's a lot of new legislation coming up. There's a lot of things that we want to get a local perspective on. So we'll be doing that, and of course, some fun things too, getting ready for the holidays. Hopefully some heartwarming stories of people, helping out others here this holiday season. So good mix there, hard news and some fun stuff as well.
Okay, Chris Graham with the Augusta Free Press talking about a weekend review from a news standpoint. We'll come back for more of online here on Classic Country, AM 1450 on this Friday, right after this.